Tonight, I can report to the American people and to the world that the United States has conducted an operation that killed Osama bin Laden.
Where we continue to follow the capture and killing of Osama bin Laden now.
Those are just some of the scenes overnight as thousands of Americans gathered in celebration of Osama bin Laden's death.
Former Navy SEAL Rob O'Neill says he has thought about the mission every day since that May Day in 2011.
From multiple conversations you had with Rob O'Neill over the past year and a half, how'd you get
access? And you described that his head kind of exploded when you hit him.
I actually hit him 3 times because I shot him twice when he was standing and once on the ground.
That is the fucking American badass right there.
We are not going for fame and we are not going for bravado. We are going for the single mom who dropped her kids off at elementary school on a Tuesday morning, and then 45 minutes later she jumped to her death out of a skyscraper.
If you need help, hang up and then dial your operator.
I'm Rob O'Neill, and this is the Operator Podcast.
Welcome back to the Operator Podcast. I'm your host, Robert J. O'Neill. And we've been talking a little bit about Afghanistan because that is a major part of some of our lives, a little bit about Iraq, some of the stuff overseas, and some nonsense. It's called the Operator Podcast because we can talk to each other, operator to operator. I'm going to give you my opinion on a few things, and then you can give me your opinion back to me. And like I mentioned before, go to the Operator Podcast on Instagram or at Makuya on Twitter. Twitter's usually not as nice as most social media, but I do occasionally go read there. I might answer you. I might just mute you. You'll never know, but I'm not going to block you. So tell me if you want to hear something good. Tell me if you want to hear something bad, whatever we happen to be getting into today, because of the recently released bin Laden papers. It was a bunch of the shit that we found in Abbottabad, Pakistan, in Osama bin Laden's house. I've been able to read through a lot of that stuff, and that team, that incredible team that was in there on the ground, is actually credited with finding a lot of this stuff. We stayed an extra 18 minutes, something like that, to find all this stuff, and it was a lot of bin Laden's thoughts. There was stuff we found in there that would surprise you, and it wasn't the porn. We discussed the masturbation dilemma for everyone in the house or in Waziristan or in Iraq, because they couldn't bring their families or whatever. But we discussed, Osama bin Laden liked to keep a lot of notes, and he would write quite a bit by hand, and he would write on a computer, and he put them on thumb drives. And the way that it would work is he didn't have a phone, and they didn't have internet in that house because he was pretty good about his OPSEC, his operational security, I guess. And so he would have a courier who would drive away from the house, and I believe wouldn't even turn their phones on until they were at least 90 minutes away by road. And that was how that's eventually how they tracked him back. A lot of the agency people on the ground with kick-ass interpreters, guys that really busted their humps. That whole team for the agency was awesome. They did a great job, and they don't fully get the credit they deserve, even though they're, maybe some of them are the type of people that don't want any credit. That's fine. They did a great job, and they were so good. They were so good about it that I was at Jalalabad Airfield on the CIA base, like in January of 2011, and I bet some of the people were there too, and I didn't even know they were there. They were really good about that. I'll give everybody shit. I'll knock on every branch of the service for fun. I'm a big believer that you should never lose your sense of humor, because that's all we got. None of us are getting out of this alive. But I've made fun of them, and we all got our people, the funny nicknames, and Marines are really good at making fun of themselves, and so are some of the agency people. But some people take themselves too seriously, and they would hide stuff that didn't need to be hidden, or pretend you're on a need-to-know basis, and you don't need to know, that kind of bullshit where they say, I could tell you, but I'd have to kill you. First of all, no, you wouldn't. But anyway, kick-ass group there. We did find a lot of this stuff, and then it was just recently released. And just what Osama bin Laden was thinking before 9/11, how he got involved with it. And, that dude had a lot of time in that house, because he would go outside a little bit. That's where they spotted the pacer, they called him. They could see him outside walking around. And he had a lot of time to think, a lot of time to write, and he actually had some video games in there too, which is pretty funny. I'll get into those. We were surprised we'd find that. The porn was funny. The video games are funny too, but man, what you gonna do? But he would write a lot, and the papers came out, and it's the truth about Al-Qaeda, its leader, and his family. In order to talk about that, I need to caveat this with, I am not an Islamic scholar. So I could be a little bit wrong, but I want to get down to just a little bit of what I know about Islam, about a lot of these guys that are fighting. I'm not picking on Islam by any means. If you'll notice, religion is pretty much the leading cause of death in the history of man. So that's that. There's that. But the way it started was obviously I was raised Catholic, and being Catholic, we believe in the Holy Trinity. So God is the Son of Man, as is the Holy Spirit, and they're all one, but they're in three. And that's not what Muslims believe. They believe that Jesus was one of many prophets, and Muhammad was the last prophet. So I want to say, and again, if I screw this up, holler at me. I'm not trying to insult anybody, and I can just hear my crazy aunt up at Butte, Montana, banging her head against the wall because I just said that I'm open-minded. So they have a lot of the same prophets. So in Islam, there's Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Solomon, Jesus, and then the last prophet was Muhammad. And then Muhammad, he was born in Mecca right around 570, and then he died in Medina. So those are the two holy cities in Saudi Arabia, Mecca and Medina. And he started Islam, and he's the only prophet. And everything was great. I'm not getting into to too much about it, but like just going around and preaching. And I guess he went up to the mountain. It always seems they go to the mountain. It's like God never seems to talk to people when they're in a group. Like they go up to a mountain or somewhere. But he went up there and he didn't talk to God. He got the word of God from the angel Gabriel. You probably heard his name before. And then like Gabriel and Michael the archangel and those bad dudes. Like there's some really cool stuff about those guys. It is the same name, so you kind of wonder who's saying what and where. And then Muhammad's the prophet, and he was given the word of God by Gabriel. And then the Quran is the word of God, but it was written 20 years after Muhammad's death, something like that. So after Muhammad died, I'm just trying to, as limited as my knowledge of the Quran is, and what I'm doing is I'm getting into the militancy of a lot of these people and where it sort of comes from. And after Muhammad died, he didn't have a male heir, and that they think would have been easiest if he just had a male heir, then he could be the next prophet. But Muhammad died, and then that was kind of a split right there. And a lot of people thought that they weren't sure if it should be his like a council that elects, or his closest blood relative. So Ali was married to Muhammad's daughter, and so a lot of people thought he should be the caliph. And then Abu Bakr was actually the first caliph because he was one of Muhammad's friends, if that makes any sense. So that went to council. It wasn't Ali. Ali eventually became the fourth caliph after the two in front of him were killed. They'd been assassinated. So we started off with a bang right away. We started killing each other. And it seems like the word that I get is that Muslims have lived next to each other. This is the split. The followers of Ali are the Shia, and the others are the Sunni. Name for the Sunnah or tradition. So Shia and Sunni did live together in relative peace until man really got involved. And what I mean by that is until like oil and gas got involved in power and riches and stuff like that. And again, I wasn't there. Obviously, that's a long, long time ago. A lot of the same names, a lot of people trying to do some good stuff, but the split started. The split really started there with the Sunni and the Shia, and right now I want to say it's 90% of the world's Muslim are Sunni, and 10% ish. My math could be wrong. Are Shia, and there has sort of been power struggles here and there, and again, just with the power, with the riches, what we're going to get, and even there's always something, you saw with like Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who was making the caliphate, the caliph, and he's going to be the end of times, but he gets found by a dog and blows himself up, which is, I mean, a lot of those guys don't ever blow themselves up. They convince guys to blow themselves up, but he did. So he was killed by Delta, which is great. But they're always saying this is the sign. This is the end of it. There was even part of the reason that you might remember in the 80s, there was a really long war in between Iran and Iraq, and it never, I mean, Iraq, I'm assuming, invaded first and they took some land, but it never quite, it really didn't move but a matter of feet. And the reason that the Shia were really, really pissed, other than getting attacked by a lunatic. You ever notice that Saddam spelled backwards is mad ass? So there's that for you. But they were, what a lot of more radicalized Shia were saying is that because Shia is dominant in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places like that, but they were saying that even in places where we're dominant, the Sunni will try to take over, and that was an example right there, was that Saddam Hussein is now the dictator in Iraq, so it means this is the next step where the Sunni are taking over. And again, it just turns into usually men who are being dicks. I don't think that's a religious term, but being dicks. And then so that just kind of started back there. Abu Bakr was the first caliph. And as far as Caliph 2, if you're looking for this, and I'm assuming you will, and you're trying to see if I'm wrong or I'm right, and you're Googling, don't Google Mia Khalifa. Just don't. And if you know, you know. Repetition, redundancy. We talk about planning and preparation every single week. We talk about the report that came out a couple months back that the American household net income dropped by over $6 trillion. That was in the second quarter. That's the most on record. Were you prepared? And what are you doing to plan for the next report that's coming out? Take my advice. Protect your financial future with gold and silver from my friends at Allegiance Gold. Allegiance Gold can help protect your IRA or 401k with physical gold and silver, or if you prefer, have it delivered securely right to your front door. I've been all over the planet, and there is only one universal currency that's always of value, and that's gold. Allegiance Gold has some of the highest ratings in the industry. 5 stars with TrustLink, AAA rated with the Business Consumer Alliance, and an A+ from the Better Business Bureau. Go to protectwiththeoperator.com and get $2,500 of free silver on a qualifying purchase when you tell them the operator sent you. Or give them a call at 844-790-9191. That's 844-790-9191. We can't control the Biden administration, but we can prepare for the consequences of their policies. ProtectWithTheOperator.com. That's ProtectWithTheOperator.com, or give them a call at 844-790-9191. I'm just bringing this up again. I'm not picking, well, I sort of picked my side a while ago, but just to give an idea of what is going on, just a little bit of the split there, how I mean, it is proof that most people can live in peace, but when you start to get people who really want power, that's when a lot of the fighting starts, because if you radicalize someone based on your ideology and telling someone that the other guy's bad, they can, they have a tendency to fight each other. I've said before that I don't think people are born hating. They need to be taught to hate. So, people are fighting over in that part of the world. The first attack on Americans, as far as Islamic terrorists goes, was not Al Qaeda. It was actually from a Shia radicalized group when we sent Marines to maintain a visible presence in the capital of Beirut. We're over in Lebanon, and what they wanted to do was that there's warring factions, as there always is, and it usually has to do with, they'll say that Israel is the occupier, and that's Palestine, and the Palestinians want them out, and the Israelis say that they've always been there, which is true for every religion. It's pretty much always been there. I really hope someone doesn't come after me for that. But we sent Marines over there in the early 80s, and the thing was they're going to maintain a presence. So get armed Marines out there just to maintain the peace. And this is just another example of not realizing if you are in a certain place long enough, you're going to be seen as occupiers from the locals, especially if you're dressed the way we dress sometimes. If you're wearing body armor or even just the H gear and the helmets and the guns, you look like an occupier. And just think right now, if you saw a bunch of Syrian soldiers walking down the streets of Tallahassee, you would say, well, I'll be damned. Those are Syrian soldiers. They're occupying us. But we have the good intentions, but that's what the road to hell is always paved with, right? So we were supposed to not take sides. So you got the way that it works. You always hear Hamas and Hezbollah. And Hezbollah is the Iranian-backed Shia militia, and Hamas is Sunni. And we're getting into that, and you'll see like a lot of Sunnis come from Saudi Arabia, 15 to 19 hijackers on 9/11. And then the Shia, or Iran, Iran is the single, what do they call them? Single greatest sponsor of worldwide terror, which they are, not the people, but the mullahs, the ayatollahs. Which one am I saying wrong? The ayatollahs are. But we had a peace presence in Beirut, and before there was a big explosion. Before the big one, there was actually a terrorist detonated truck bomb at the U.S. Embassy, killing 63 people. This is at the embassy before the barracks bombing. 17 Americans were killed there. And that's when the embassy, typical Americans, adjusted after the fact, not looking over the ridge line and trying to predict what could happen. So they changed the mission and the rules of engagement. And boy, we can talk about rules of engagement all day long. What they were saying for the Marines are because the Marines hadn't really shot yet. They're maintaining a presence. They said now the Marines could return fire if they perceived a threat. So if you perceive a threat, then you can shoot. And that's kind of what troops in contact, we would call it tick, because we shorten stuff. We would call it tick. You can call it tick if you just feel like you're going to be in danger. And a tick, you can escalate with however you want to do it. And then shortly after the incidents, there was a vehicle approaching one of the buildings, and the Marines shot, and I'm quoting here, they said the word went out that we do shoot back and that we hit what we shoot at. And a lot of the senior officers were starting to call it a very fragile, very volatile political situation. We're still worried about politics. That's where it all comes from. The politics are always what we're looking for. But the Marines became a target of these militias. They would be leaving the airport or going back and forth. They got hit by small arms, rocket fire. It pretty much became clear that shit's getting real. There's more engagement. So you got it always comes back to them trying to kick the Israelis out of Israel. Like I said, but even though they've always been there. There was even a point where we started using naval gunfire, U.S. naval gunfire to support. You start throwing bombs out of those big ass battleships. It's real now. That's some real stuff. And again, it doesn't matter what your intentions are. If a naval ship is shooting at you, you're going to see them as the bad guys. The difference between a ship and a boat, by the way, is one of the technical definitions is when a ship turns, it leans outboard, and when a boat turns, it leans inboard. A little food for thought there. So they're doing that, and then. So then Hezbollah through Iran still, they've always been up to no good. They were the ones that designed the explosively formed penetrators that were killing so many Americans in Iraq, even though the Shia and the Sunni, the militants, don't care for each other. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so they were teaching them how to build those things. But Hezbollah carried out an attack under the orders from Iran. And like we said, the good intentions, right? And it was a compressed gas enhanced bomb detonated by a suicide truck bomber. So the first real suicide bomber that, because at first it's like, wow, these guys are killing themselves. But see, that they're killing themselves because they're believers. Both sides believe if you die fighting the infidels that you're going to go to heaven. So this compressed gas enhanced bomb was the largest non-nuclear explosion ever recorded. And that is just ridiculous. It killed 3 soldiers, 18 sailors, and 220 Marines. And it was tough because they had obviously why it's tough and why it's horrifying. But he drove it into a barracks, and this Mercedes into a barracks and it blew up, and they couldn't identify some of the dead because anyone that could identify someone else was also dead. A lot of them were sleeping in their PT gear, no dog tags, and so it took days. That recovery took forever. And, imagine how tough that would be just on the survivors there that barely, say I just left that barracks a few minutes ago and then it goes up. And we, all the records we have are in the basement. I think it was a 4-story building that was, it was decimated. And again, it doesn't matter your intention. I'm reading here, it says in 1986, a memorial to the Beirut Marines was constructed outside the entrance to Camp Gilbert H. Johnson, formerly of the Montford Point Camp in Jacksonville, North Carolina. 2 broken granite walls, representative of the crumbled building, composed the memorial. The first is inscribed with the names of all the American servicemen killed during the operations in Beirut, with a second carries a simple inscription: "They came in peace."
You have heard me mention this before, and we are growing. I talk about when we used to dip in the military all of the time, and it got to the point where it was just a ritual. All we wanted to do was dip, but we wanted to get rid of the tobacco, and now we can. Introducing, again, Black Buffalo. It's just like the experience of dipping, but it's not dipping tobacco. They are edible green leaves. There is pharmaceutical-grade nicotine if you prefer. We also have nicotine-free versions. Food-grade ingredients, no tobacco leaf or stem. And we're spreading all over the country. Go to blackbuffalo.com to check it out. Use the code THEOPERATOR to get 15% off of your first order. Go check out blackbuffalo.com. Use code THEOPERATOR. I've had buddies do it. We talked about New Year's resolutions. So far, so good. People are happy. Go to blackbuffalo.com. Code THEOPERATOR.
But yeah, that's, like we're saying, the best intentions don't always end up that way. And you get groups of people who disagree. It can escalate, I guess, into violence. And then also we not learning from our history, not learning what we don't know about winning. I mean, I'm not an expert on, anything, but I do think I'm smart enough to see that sometimes there's a difference between diplomacy and being military. I mean, when you think Marine Corps, you should think killing. Marines will go in and kill. And they'll be really, really good, the best infantry in the world. No disrespect to the United States Army or the Canadians or all of our friends and allies, but the Marine Corps goes in and fucks shit up. And that's what they're there for. They're not there to be a peacekeeping mission. That's how we lost Afghanistan, because we decided to go in there and just let people try to use them as diplomats, as building schools, making sure they have voting places where they go. And we don't really need to be doing that. We should use our military the way we did when the war first started with the horse soldiers, the SF, the CIA, the bombs we dropped. And then once you kicked Al-Qaeda's ass, which we did right away by December, you give them a stern finger wave and say, no, don't do it again. And then if there needs to be diplomacy, let the diplomats do it. But a lot of people in the State Department are too busy making sure words aren't misused on the 50-page PowerPoint brief that they give each other every single day. But that's how it happened. And that was one of the first suicide attacks on the United States. That was 1983, but that wasn't what really radicalized a lot of people. What did was the invasion of Afghanistan in 1979. The Russians invaded Afghanistan. We've covered that before, because Russia's trying to spread communism, and we always do. We're going to stop the spread of communism, because that's what we were doing in Vietnam, right? We were stopping the spread of communism, so that worked. But that was one of the things that sort of radicalized a lot of people like Osama bin Laden. We're going to get into his history and his Al-Qaeda's history, how he started Al-Qaeda, which means the base, and why. We'll get into his. Before we jump into that, because it is this is a kind of a long subject. The reason for the radicalization of bin Laden, who he was hanging out with, how he went and financed
a lot of the Mujahideen, along with us, we helped finance the Mujahideen as well because they were fighting the Russians because at the time that was our enemy. The Russians are going to be our enemy, and Russia has a track record of invading places. But hey, so do we, right? I needed to correct, and again, I like corrections on my Instagram or my Twitter, and you guys have been surprisingly nice on Twitter lately. What's going on with that, man? Maybe it's because my wife put a breathalyzer on my phone for me finally. What the hell was I just saying? Oh, yeah. I was corrected. I was talking about Kandahar with the Canadian Special Forces, and it was awesome to work anywhere where the Canadians were because they had a Tim Hortons donut. And I said Tony Horton, and Tony Horton's awesome. He like invented P90X and writes all those motivating books, and like I think he's pushing 60 now, isn't he? And his abs have abs. Like he's a badass, but I don't think he's a big donut guy. So I apologize to the Horton family. I don't even know if are those guys related. So I said Tony, I meant Tim. Great donuts, good coffee too. Thank you to my neighbors up north, the Great White North, for correcting me on that one. So the explosion in Beirut was 1983, but the Russians invaded Afghanistan in 1979, and that was an uprising in Muslim land because what they say, and they're very, I mean, they're not vague, but they're looking at stuff differently than we are. Muslims have a different calendar. They don't say BC or Anno Domini, which is year of our Lord, and the other one is before Christ. They will say, "See." If you see this, and no one ever wants to ask, don't be afraid of being the guy in the room that asks the question when you get asked who doesn't understand. Just say you don't understand. What does CE mean? And BCE. And I just learned this because I was looking it up because I was Googling shit, like I said earlier. CE means Common Era, and BCE means before Common Era. It's pretty simple, actually. That's like the entire world uses the metric system except us. I mean, and it makes perfect sense. The metric system is actually in order, and it should be a law, and it looks really, really good, and it makes perfect sense, the metric system. But I couldn't tell you what 80 centimeters of snow is. I don't know. I know what a meter is just because it's a little longer than a yard. And I mean, I try to, like, when I get on television in the UK or something worldwide, I'll say kilometer, but it's kilometer. I know that. And even some of those, if you can imagine arrogant Americans, you'll hear them say, yeah, we're the only one in, there's only one country that's been to the moon and they don't use the metric system, even though astronauts have told me that they used the metric system when they went to the moon. And as we talked about in the last one, some astronauts have said we haven't gone to the moon. And I suggested, I'm so sorry that I said Buzz Aldrin was dead. I suggested it. He's not dead. And I'm sorry. But yeah, they use the metric system. I guess it's the same reason. And did I say the Big Mac's a Big Mac, but they call it La Big Mac? They call it a Royale with cheese because they don't know what a quarter pound is. But so we were getting into some of that stuff. The Russians invaded Afghanistan, which went to us funding the resistance, as we would call them. But that's where we really got Osama bin Laden, because he was from Saudi Arabia, from a very rich family. His father, and I think this word gets thrown around too much, billionaire. But his dad, bin Laden's dad, was a self-made billionaire. Like, if you're ever meeting people, especially when you get out of the Navy and you meet some very successful, or what you think are very successful business people, then if you hear the word billionaire thrown around, they're not billionaires. You don't know a billionaire. But Osama bin Laden's dad allegedly was a self-made billionaire because of the construction companies that he had, and then his close ties with the Saudi royal family. And he is, I want to say his dad had 50 other kids. 50 kids, one of them bin Laden. I heard a story the other day about one of his sisters or his niece got asked, she was on, I think it was Noor bin Laden. Is that his niece? And something along the lines, and I don't want to give credit where credit is not due, but something along the lines of, well, what's the deal with Osama? And she goes, hey, you line up 10 members of any family, you're going to have one asshole. So, i.e., Osama bin Laden was an asshole. So, get a load of this. Have you heard of ketones? Ketones are a natural super fuel that's created by your body when it's reached its metabolic limit, and it's usually by fasting, a diet, or restricting your carbs. And because of some of our lifestyles, it's hard to keep those levels until now. Introducing Ketone IQ. Thanks to science, we have drinkable fuel you can take with you. What is Ketone IQ? It's brain fuel. Clean energy boost without the sugar or the caffeine. When can you use it? Whenever you want. Whenever you need to get that extra boost, think a little clearer or maybe just be a little bit funnier. You can find Ketone at hvmn.com. Visit hvmn.com and use the code THEOPERATOR at checkout to save 20%. That is hvmn.com, promo code THEOPERATOR. HVMN stands for Health Via Modern Nutrition. So go to hvmn.com, use code THEOPERATOR. But again, getting into, based on your views, who's the good guys and who's the bad guys. I remember being on missions. I remember one mission in particular in Iraq, somewhere near Ramadi probably, where we went into a house at night. And it was a wrong house. It was a woman and her daughter, and I remember they were both in their bedclothes, in their pajamas or whatever. And I remember standing on their white carpet. It was a pretty nice house in a pretty nice neighborhood. Getting mud all over their white carpet. My initial thought was, well, I understand why they hate us. What? We're just here. Hey, it's 3 a.m. Here we are in your house. Yeah, so that, but I'm trying to give a little bit of a background, and I might screw some of it up, and if I do, just correct me if I'm wrong. But so it was the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan in 1979 that eventually led to the formation of Al Qaeda, because the Mujahideen went in there, and they're obviously working through Pakistan to try to beat the Russians, and the Russians are the atheists, so they're obviously bad. We hate the Russians, so we're going to help defeat them, along with MI6, who had their own covert stuff going along, but we started ours off with the CIA and Operation Cyclone, where I think it started off, and I've talked about this before, but it started off with like Enfield rifles, which are like the bolt action guns. And then it ended up with the kick-ass Stinger missile, sending a bunch of those into there. I mentioned before, it was funded by Charlie Wilson. That movie, Charlie Wilson's War, is awesome too. If you haven't watched it, watch it. It's about Charlie Wilson and Gus Davricados, who started it off with a very limited amount of money. They ended up sending hundreds and hundreds of millions in there that the Saudis matched, and Pakistan took in, and I'm sure gave it all to them for the refugees and whatnot. But bin Laden was a Saudi, and that's the Holy Land. And he, like I said, he had more than 50 children. His dad, Mohammed bin Laden, was a self-made billionaire we were talking about earlier. Got in tight with the royal family, and was building a lot of their structures in Saudi Arabia. So, well-to-do family, got a lot of money, don't need to live in caves. But bin Laden studied business administration at King Abdul Aziz University in Jeddah, and he also received instruction in religious studies, because pretty much that part of the world, wherever you go, you're going to get religious studies. And there were two dudes there that were Muhammad Qutb, and he's the brother of the Islamic revivalist Sayyid Qutb, and then Abdullah Azzam, who's a Palestinian and a militant leader. And his time at the university there was key to bin Laden, to his future role as a leader of Al Qaeda. Not just in influencing his radical views, but also providing him with the skill to market Al Qaeda. I guess you got to do commercials for everything. And so the Russians invaded Saudi Arabia, and because of his connections and his finances, bin Laden went the Russians invaded Afghanistan. Bin Laden eventually went over there to help him out. He could. It was mainly his activities were centered in Afghanistan and Pakistan in 1984, and he was collaborating with Azzam to recruit, get more Arabs to come into Afghanistan, which is a unique place, because in Afghanistan, you're a foreign fighter. You're a foreigner. Just because they're fighting for you doesn't mean, like I said, invaders. But they went in there with our help, Stinger missiles. Like there was some of the jihadis that were saying the only thing we need to beat the Russians is the Quran and more American-made Stinger missiles. So they did defeat him with a lot of help, and then the Soviets withdrew from Afghanistan. Bin Laden actually returned to Saudi Arabia, where he was initially praised as a hero, and then, if you recall, Iraq invaded Kuwait because Saddam Hussein was saying that Kuwait was like diagonally drilling an illegal way to drill or whatever and stealing Iraqi oil. So naturally, Iraq that had a much bigger army or an army at all, and they invaded Kuwait, and that obviously is going to prompt people around the world, because now that oil's involved, we're all going to be involved. So we set up a coalition, I want to say, of like 35 countries, 35, 38 nations, a coalition of the willing to go in there, and we started what's called Desert Shield. And that pissed off Bin Laden because he had a Mujahideen army that he said he could use, but no, they didn't go for that. And we had essentially they just don't want non-believers in Muslim land. That's the whole thing. So we went there. Eventually started a bombing campaign, Desert Storm, and then we got what we wanted. We got the American hostages back, and then we got the Iraqis out. But we also, we always seem to need to test our technology, so we bombed the shit out of them. And we were actually impressed with that, we being the United States, because during the Cold War, we were kind of an underdog, but we never really, we saw what we could do with the Stinger missiles for the Russians, but we didn't know how we were going to, how we could beat them. But then it turned into such an ass whipping. Putting missiles through windows on the third floor of a building, and then also shooting down their Scud missiles with Patriot missiles. Even though we kind of inflated how good the Patriot missiles were, we proved that we had anti-missile missiles and real tanks. The M1 Abrams got to fight the Air Force, crushed. We were using drones. We were flying, I guess, stealth bombers from like Nebraska to bomb Iraq and crap like that, and that initially pissed off Bin Laden, who was exiled in the early 90s out of Saudi Arabia, and then he moved to Sudan. And we also had a presence in Somalia. That also pissed off Al-Qaeda, not just the fact that we're non-believers and infidels, but the fact that we're in Muslim lands. And basically what they're saying is until Muslims can live in peace in the Holy Land, Americans won't live in peace anywhere. And so they were basically saying that military or civilian, it is God's law, God's will to kill them. And then it even includes, in 1993, if you recall, the World Trade Center was bombed for the first time, and it wasn't as bad as 9/11, obviously, but it's showing to you that they want to not just kill as many people as they can, but they also want as many eyes on, like I mentioned before, on it. And the World Trade Center is symbolic of American, I think, exceptionalism or prowess or whatever you want to call it. But you think of the World Trade Center, you think of the United States. They declared a fatwa on the United States, and we're at war with them. And then it was even later on that Bin Laden is living in Sudan, and then he's going to get rolled out of there because we've got CIA guys looking for him there. And one of the interesting things, I'd love to talk to some of the guys that were involved with this, is they were saying that if we had the chance to kill Osama bin Laden, we should have killed him. But some of the guys on the ground, some of the case officers, the paramilitary guys for the agency on the ground was saying, well, no, we had permission to capture him. This is before 9/11, to capture bin Laden. If his shit went sideways, then we could kill him. But then just having those smart guys on the ground, knowing that with whatever kind of the political will there was at this time of the year, how do I know what their version of went sideways is? I mean, what if we go after him, we kill him, but something goes bad? Then, I wouldn't put it past the United States government to put us in prison. So they had a couple shots here. They ran into shit like that. Then there was actually an airline that crashed. I want to say 1999, right around there, 1999, I think, where there was an Egypt air flight going from Los Angeles to LAX and then LAX to Egypt, and about 60 miles south of Nantucket, the plane went into the ocean. So the pilot crashed it, and I'm not even sure about the black box if they found it or whether or not, but it's obviously one pilot waiting for the other pilot to go use the shitter. And when he's in there, lock the door, and then God is great, God is great, God is great, and crash it into the ocean. It killed everyone on board. You're not going to survive that, just dropping like that. And the word that I got is that bin Laden, and that wasn't Al-Qaeda, and even the World Trade Center, the first bombing, they're saying it's not necessarily Al-Qaeda, but they would eventually take credit. But when Osama bin Laden heard about the Egypt air flight, he said, well, why would they crash it into the ocean when they can just crash it in some of those financial buildings? And now it's time for some breaking news, and this is hot off the press. Manscaped now sells beard products. That's right. They're once again revolutionizing men's grooming with the brand new Beard Hedger Pro Kit. From a beard trim to a fresh shave, the technology behind the Beard Hedger Pro Kit allows you to shape your signature beard look. Now you can finally use Manscaped products to make your drapes match the carpet by going to manscaped.com and using code THEOPERATOR for 20% off free shipping. So it is time to tame your mane, and this thing just fixed faces. I like it because there's one guard but 20 hair cutting lengths, which means no more messy drawers. It is waterproof, it's cordless, titanium-coated T-blade, and there's a shampoo and conditioner just for beards, because you remember, the face on your hair is different than other places. There's Manscaped's beard oil, which is essential for your main facial accessory. Nobody wants a guy whose beard is brittle and dry. And there's the beard balm, which is a pomade. It shapes and styles it. It also comes with 3 free gifts, a beard brush, comb, and scissors to ensure your beard is ready to impress. So get 20% off and free shipping with the code THEOPERATOR at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com. Use the code THEOPERATOR. Manscaped Beard Hedger. 1 stroke, 1 guard, 20 lengths. Manscaped.com. But I am hopping around a little bit. Just trying to find out the origins of what's what. And like I said, it's generally it gets screwed up because we got involved, because men got involved. Like, you got to figure Muhammad was born in 570, and different sects of Islam, Wahhabism, Salafism, if I'm saying that right, they didn't. Hundreds of years later, they were started. It was all based on what they thought was purity, getting back to being pure, and that's about it. And then. Like, Al-Qaeda wasn't necessarily responsible for the 93 bombing of the World Trade Center, but bin Laden was expanding his infrastructure and training other Islamic militants, because he got booted. You know, you got to figure, so you fight in Russia, you're in Pakistan, get back into Saudi Arabia, treated as a hero, but then you get booted out of that. So he goes to Sudan and, kind of corrupt down there, and he's able to set up training areas for Islamic militants, and he's getting a really good following. Everywhere, from places all around the world, all around the Arabian Peninsula, places like Bosnia, Chechnya. They were even supposedly involved with the shoot downs of Black Hawk Down. That was like Al-Qaeda was there. A couple years later, in 1996, in extreme pressure, they booted him out of Sudan. So now he's kicked out of a couple different countries. And then where does he go? He goes up to Afghanistan, where they're still reeling from the fact that the Soviets just left, or from the fact that they're just living in Afghanistan because it's not the same planet over there. But then they're able to set up different training camps, training in methods and tactics and all kinds of stuff. And then you just start seeing a couple more attacks. In 1998, there was pretty much at the same time, there were bombings at American embassies, one in Nairobi, one in Dar es Salaam, so one in Kenya and Tanzania, which is believed to kill 224 people. And then we responded by sending cruise missiles at what we believe to be where bin Laden was hiding in southern Afghanistan. So we're going to launch cruise missiles, and that's pretty much our response to anything. And they're starting to believe that the great Satan, which of course is us, we're not willing to fight anywhere. And then we used to have to park some of our warships. Right in 2000, they parked the USS Cole it was harbored in Yemen, and it was bombed. It just so happened the bomb hit at the Chow Hall, and it killed 17 sailors on board. And they're crediting this growth of charisma to this growth to his charisma, to bin Laden's charisma, and people want to follow him because, again, they're they believe in him, and they really believe that they're the good guys, and we believe that they're the bad guys, and that's one side or the other. I personally think they're the bad guys. You shouldn't be killing people like that. But just going back to my side or death is kind of the way they're rolling. And so he was able to give rhetorical strategy. Like I said, he learned from Egypt Air, and the way that if you can get control of a plane and you can crash it wherever you want, if you crash it into a building. And initially, what he thought would happen is he would crash a plane into one of the towers and it would fall into the other tower and you'd lose part of it. And then we would launch a couple missiles at Afghanistan and then we'd stop. Or, they never expected the towers to fall, but 19 hijackers got on those 4 planes, and then they expected us to either, like I said, launch cruise missiles or get into a war and just bleed us to death. Because at this point, other countries are watching, and they decided just based on the first Gulf War and the second Gulf War and what they've seen us do, because we've put everything that we do on a roadmap to how we fight. And people have said, you do not fight the U.S. without nuclear capabilities. And that's why if you look enough into the ideologies of some of these crazy people that are in charge, you got to wonder, why in the hell would we want to give someone like Iran a nuclear weapon? If you have people that are so devout, why the hell would you leave the border open? It's not about politics and votes. This is some serious shit. And you just wonder where it's at, because it always seems like we just come back to personal power. People are making political decisions based on what power they can hold. And it's not as simple as it is for the bad guys just to say it's either us or them. You got to wonder why there's a lot of this stuff here, and why. And you've got to realize we were attacked in 1993 at the World Trade Center, but they didn't forget about us, and they came back, and they haven't forgotten about us now, have they? And they're probably going to come back, and I don't want them to. And I think it would be better to be able to just talk it out, but it doesn't seem like a lot of these people are going to do that, because someone taught them what someone else taught them, and it always seems to start with some radicalized person or professor who's screaming at you about hating someone else. And based on what happened with our involvement in Afghanistan, with our involvement with the Russians' involvement in Afghanistan, and then mix that bowl of suicide bomber soup up with some crazy religion, you get Al-Qaeda. But again, too, it's not always just Al-Qaeda. I think the Muslim Brotherhood was started in like 1929 in Egypt, and like everything, it was under the banner of we need to stop British occupation of Egypt, and then when you get into occupation, it's usually because the country that is occupying is looking for something. Egypt screams Suez Canal and whatever minerals you can find. I wouldn't be surprised to find out if we were helping Saudi Arabia, because if Saddam controlled Kuwait's oil, they would be in charge of half of the world's oil supply. We can't have that. That's a monopoly. Then only we can have a monopoly. But it's also, look at a lot of them, they're not the same group, but they are the same offshoot. If you can recall, and I've talked about it before, right after we invaded Afghanistan, we were drawing up plans to invade Iraq. And that was for personal and political and whatever made up reasons. And I'd even heard stories of someone in a powerful position saying, well, you got to meet the General so-and-so. And who's General? What does he do? Well, he's in charge of Afghanistan. Whoop, don't need to meet him then, because Afghanistan's over, they thought initially. And then we invaded Iraq. And the way that whole madness went down, too, I know I'm supposed to be talking about the history of Al-Qaeda. That's how Al-Qaeda in Iraq started, because there was another Sunni Muslim, Abu Musab al-Zarqawi, who's a Jordanian, was over there, and he's rolling around doing his little jihadi thing all over the place. And at first he was scaring some of the Al-Qaeda guys, and if you can scare Al-Qaeda with being gruesome, you're a fucking black belt in whatever the hell you're doing. But he was doing those beheading videos, and like one of the first guys he beheaded was a guy by the name of Nick Berg, and it was so graphic to Westerners that like we decided it had to be fake. There's no way they're doing that. And Zarqawi was just beheading up to the point where some of the stuff that ISIS was doing, you almost hope just to get beheaded while you're alive. They were, and it didn't even matter if you were a Muslim. Do you remember the Jordanian pilot that got shot down? And there's weird rumors around that when we were trying to fight. We couldn't even decide what ISIS meant. ISIS, Iraq and Syria, or in the Levant, or whatever they were calling it. We couldn't even decide that. And they had people, Jordanians, helping us fly in the coalition. And a rumor, again, that Jordanian pilot that got shot down was actually shot down on accident by a female pilot that was flying with him. I don't know. Anyway, but he got rolled up. And they had some really good cinematographers working for ISIS, because they made this video of like this dude in the orange jumpsuit. Now, the orange jumpsuit, if you'll remember, is what we would put insurgents in when we arrested them, in Iraq especially, the orange jumpsuit. And then you had those army idiots that were, I'm all about a human pyramid, but if you're going to do it to a prisoner, just don't take a picture of it. Keep your pyramids to your fucking self. But they had them in the orange and red jumpsuits. And so that's funny, because they were calling the human pyramid and fake electrocution. I mean, fake. They were calling that torture because the media just loves to go against America. I don't know how it is. Like, America is like the big fucking dummy that can beat everyone's ass, but no one tells him that he can. So he just lets them just pick at their ankles. Like the press does. Press hates us. So they're saying, obviously Abu Ghraib this and torture that. And so that, believe it or not, that inspires jihadis. In this case, jihadis, if you see some of what you consider to be your own people getting mistreated, then you're going to want to defend them too. So that's where the orange jumpsuit came from. But anyway, this Jordanian pilot allegedly got shot down by a female Jordanian pilot. And he when they found him, he parachuted into a lake, and the locals, because they don't know what to do. The locals, when they're getting tortured by these assholes, they told ISIS where he was, and they pulled him out of this lake he was trying to hide in. And the dude didn't have any pants anymore. Like, he had the top of whatever he was wearing, but no pants, which tells you, I would think, the power at which it is to eject from a jet, especially when you just got shot down by a friend of yours. But it wasn't even, again, he was a Muslim, to the point where I guess his dad is some sort of a bigwig in Jordan, and he said, he's not a prisoner of ISIS, he's a guest of ISIS, which didn't work. But they made a video of him walking around in his orange jumpsuit through a burnt-out city to symbolize what the coalitions were doing to Muslims forever. And you get to feel and see what this is like. And then they put him in a cage, and then they doused him in fuel, and they left a trail of it, and they lit him on fire. For real. And then, after he was just smoldering, can you imagine? And then they had a big bulldozer push a bunch of concrete on top of him, so you can feel what it's like to be hot and then crushed by a building. And again, that had nothing to do with being a Muslim. The guy was a Muslim. He was the wrong kind of Muslim, and it's horrible. And that's like the whole. Did George Carlin say that? Do you believe in God? No. Boom, dead. Do you believe in God? Yes. Do you believe in my God? No. Boom, dead. And the ISIS guys were just an offshoot of Al Qaeda. They were Salafi, Sunni terrorists, and they just that's the way they roll. And see, what they're saying though is that, like, the more you do to someone else, the more it's going to make people rise up, and that's true. And it does, seeing, as ridiculous as it was, seeing the human pyramid, it made people want to kill you, to kill us. And then hearing the stories of what some of us, just because of our lack of communication in some places, we would do the night raids, and then the conventional army would clean it up and pay them. And then we see it right now. Recently, they're still talking about places that we bombed and how they need to get reparations. You only know what you're taught, and a lot of dudes out there are teaching this shit. And it's a matter of perception who's the good guys or bad guys. Personally, I think if you burn someone alive on purpose, cover them with rocks, or if you fly a plane full of innocent people into a building full of innocent people, you're an asshole and you're the bad guy. And then I think back to us. Eventually, because I didn't want to believe it at the time either when we're fighting in Iraq, especially. But if you don't cut the head off of the snake at first, you're going to create more insurgents, and a lot of people are going to get pissed. So that's why we would have we made it easier for him, because it was for some dude to come from Jordan or Egypt to Afghanistan. It's a haul. You know, I ran into actually a couple dudes from. You can always tell the Arabs from the Afghans, and again, me being me, I didn't know a lot about it at the time. I found the time to study about it later, and knowing the difference between who was doing what, and what kinds of people were where. Like before we went into Afghanistan, one of the problems for the Taliban was the Northern Alliance, run by Massoud. And that was like, he had 20,000 fighters, but they were Tajiks, Hazaras, Uzbeks, Turkmen. And then the Taliban was mainly Pashtun. That's from eastern and southern Afghanistan. And then the Arabs come into town, and they're foreigners, like I was saying just earlier. But when we first started going over there, it's like, I know I've said this story before, when they were given some army unit a brief on going to Iraq, and then like at last minute they switched their orders and they say, oh, by the way, your brigade's not going to Iraq, you're going to Afghanistan. And they're up there giving a brief, and it says, welcome to Iraq. And they go, well, sir, we're going to Afghanistan. And he's like, what's the difference? And that's our attitude. What's the difference? It's a pretty damn big difference. But the Northern Alliance was involved, and all that was something about the city Mazar-e-Sharif. And I really want to get into this in a later detail later, because that was where the big prison break was. That was a place where, I'm supposed to be talking about Al-Qaeda, but like the Afghans were really, really good at having warlords, but turning on each other, but then going back to the same side. And Mazar-e-Sharif was one of the cities that they, when it was being run by some of the warlords there, that's going to be an awesome episode. It was like they had, people, you were allowed to show your shoulders, listen to music, crazy, fly a kite, nuts, Armageddon, I tell you. But Massoud was killed 2 days before 9/11, and that was because a couple of Arabs came in and tricked him to say they're going to give him an interview on television. And what killed him was the suicide bomb, but also his vanity, because he wanted to be on TV. And that would have been one of the spots. There were guys like Cofer Black and George Tenet who, even before they killed Massoud, was saying that they repeatedly warned the Bush administration in 2000 that we needed a wartime posture because it's imminent. Bin Laden said he's going to attack us. They killed Massoud. That would have been our end. We already had paramilitary guys with the CIA working with Massoud, and they gave him, like the CIA would give the president a daily brief, but nobody wanted to admit there's a problem, because what's the fun in that when we can talk about other stuff that can get me reelected? And then all of a sudden your life changes, your world changes, sometimes your life ends. And when Massoud, even before 9/11, he got interviewed something, and before we really knew what Al-Qaeda was like, he had some kick-ass quote where he said about Al-Qaeda, that we've been fighting these guys for 4 years and I've never captured one of these bastards. And he's talking about Al-Qaeda. Again, suicide bombers, martyrs, believers. But those are just some of the things that have been depicted, been written down in the past. And again, it's as far as Islam goes, it starts with Muhammad, but then it branches off because man gets involved. And there's other facts in there that you would think could be debated. Like I'm sure you've heard of violence over drawing Muhammad, and that's it's not specifically in the Quran, but some people decided that you shouldn't be able to do so. Some parts of Sunni Islam don't want you drawing Muhammad because, well, they actually don't want you drawing any of the prophets, like I mentioned earlier, Adam, Noah, Abraham, Moses, Solomon, Jesus, but don't draw Muhammad because there is one God, and that's what they would call idolatry. So you're worshiping a false god. That's actually the same reason I don't know why we didn't just bury Bin Laden, because they're not going to worship at a shrine, because that's not what Sunni Muslims do. They don't. That got me thinking too that if they can't draw Jesus, that's probably what led us to draw Jesus, and so we just decided to make him white, because most guys during that part of time in that part of the world were not white. But you can't draw Muhammad. They get pissed about that. Charlie Hebdo was a satirical newspaper with cartoons in it in France, and it doesn't really matter sometimes. if you think people might be violent, there's no reason to egg them on. It's probably easier to not draw Muhammad than to try to. But Shia, they have depictions of Muhammad all over the place. They don't get along with each other. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. And then just to touch on what's happening now with Al Qaeda, now that Bin Laden's dead and Zawahiri's dead. And there was a split there in Iraq when a guy named Ibrahim al-Badri al-Samari, who had degrees in Islamic theology. He's from Samarra, Iraq, and he went to the University of Baghdad and he joined, he's taking radical Islamic theory, and he actually ended up joining the Salafi jihadi networks once we invaded Iraq, which again tells you, if we're turning people into insurgents sometimes with invasions that we don't agree with what they're doing, but they also don't agree with our invasions. So we made one out of him. He didn't look like a good guy to me. If you Google his name and his face, if you get a picture of him, he's got crazy eyes. He'll kill you. And he was a bad dude, but he became the caliph in the caliphate. So the caliphate is a land that's under Islamic rule, and the caliph, he runs it. He's in charge of it. He was the emir of Al Qaeda in Iraq until they broke rank, and then a Shura Council there. And the Shura Council is a group of senior members, kind of like when you get in trouble in the Navy and you go to a board. Been there. They broke rank with Al Qaeda, and they started the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, or in Iraq and Syria. Universally rejected by Muslims everywhere, but he decided he was the boss because that's what guys do. That's what men do when they see the leap of faith, and then they get the power. And he was in a mosque near Baghdad, announcing himself as and what he was doing is wearing like the long black robes, the same as Muhammad, and you're supposed to live in that time frame by those laws as a Salafist. However, he had the robes right, but I don't think the Prophet Muhammad was wearing a Submariner Rolex, but Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, who he became known as, was wearing those watches. And they said, no, this isn't that would be something to live in the time of Muhammad, except you use capitalism and Western technology from the from the watchmakers. But yeah, the black robes, and then that's what happened. And he was killed. He was a guy that he was serious. Like most of the dudes, I talked about him before. Most of the guys who were preaching this stuff, they would let other people kill themselves, but they never would kill themselves. They would always let someone else do it. It was like I was told that it was almost like a pyramid scheme that you can, if you get somebody to blow themselves up and be a martyr, like you get a part of their jihad in your jihad. So it's like a Amway for Allah, something like that. But I'm looking for a quote here from him, and he if you look at his crazy eyes, there they are right there. But he was just saying that something like paradise is made in the shade of swords, and he was serious about it. So he did blow himself up when Delta caught him in Syria, and then Bin Laden did not blow himself up, and neither did al-Zawahiri. Was hit by the what the hell was that thing called? A pretty kick-ass bomb that we dropped on him that cut him into a million pieces. And there's been other caliphs they've tried to make up, but like you've killed the all-star team at this point, and so dudes would step up. A couple more stepped up after Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, but then they were killed quickly. We still got guys over there, right? Don't think for a second that we don't have badasses hunting al-Qaeda. They do. They're fighting. They're in Syria now, and I'm not going to get into that. But we got some good dudes out there that kept the fight up. And I think our guys are going to keep getting better. I hope against hope that they don't get hamstrung too much with bullshit rules of engagement, especially when you're fighting an enemy like this. You got to consider what the enemy would do to you if they caught you. But our guys are doing it. They're over there, and they're sticking it to them. The issue is because you got to figure back to okay, Bin Laden was the face of Al Qaeda, and Zawahiri was there, but you got to admit he was kind of a douche. Like Bin Laden would give a speech and people would listen, and he was known for his marketing capabilities. Man, that dude can sell some jihad. But Zawahiri was like listening to someone give an hour-and-a-half speech at an insurance seminar, and no one was really fired up. Al-Baghdadi kind of got people fired up because now they own Iraq and Syria. They think because we're going to withdraw, and again, that's another episode. We're withdrawing, and so we gave them a timeline. They knew they'd be safe, just like we did with the Taliban. I guess Al-Qaeda's not crazy about getting back into Afghanistan just now, but just the fact that Ayman al-Zawahiri was killed on a porch at a Haqqani house that used to be run by us tells you that Al-Qaeda is there. And I hope we have the people that are watching for the training areas where they might try to come hit us again. But the biggest thing is we can't get complacent, because complacency does kill. And ISIS, they were violent. The genocide against the Yazidis, the sex slavery, they had an open air slave market, which is bad. I hope we can all agree on that. And then the forced wives and the rape, and even like the stupid American girls and the Brit girls that went over there to be brides of ISIS because it sounds like something cool. Don't be a bride of something just because it's a fad. You're an idiot. Go back to school, be with your parents. They actually love you. But now they're trying to get back into the States. Well, my mistake, because once I was over in with the ISIS crew and they were passing me around like a joint at a Fish concert, I thought maybe this isn't the place for me to be. But they're still there. But they loved the big. They believed that this was the end of times and they were running it, and that's going to be the caliphate. And then it proved it's not. But they're still going to prove it. But the thing is that's dangerous is that ISIS loves to make that big show, and they love to stab you in the front. The problem is Al-Qaeda will stab you in the back, and they can be very quiet about it. And that's what I'm not trying to scare anybody here, but I mean, if we could have peace everywhere, I'd be all for it. I'd be on the peace train for sure. But that's just me on my pulpit. I'm not trying to be I say doomsday guy. But I mean, you got to believe sometimes the threat's real. I don't think you need to. Some people go overboard with it, but you got to be smart. I mean, look at the way some like El Al Airlines they run a lot of their security based on how someone is acting. Who's the threat? Be realistic. The guy who happens to be wearing the Medal of Honor around his neck and is in his 90s, maybe he's not a threat. Or the woman in the wheelchair, maybe she's not a threat. I would say not all, but the majority are going to be dudes. I would say so. Ladies, give them a quick wand. And then, but again, there's me saying that, then me getting complacent, all of a sudden something else bad happens. So I don't want to do that. But, but these are all offshoots of the same ideology, and we refuse to believe it. Nobody wants to talk about it until it happens. And I don't want to see it happen. The border's a big problem, and look what they do when they bring the president finally down there. Well, they fired the czar, who was the vice president. She's been to Europe, though, I think. But I mean, you can just, so many different countries are getting across our border, and I just don't want them to recognize it because, again, it's not me. It's all of us, and it's the ideology. They can do that to the Jordanian pilot. They can do it to anybody who doesn't believe exactly what they want you to believe. And, just think about it logically. Oh, God forbid your logic. But think about logically. If you wanted to get here, even a head fake, and I don't want to give you ideas as the brilliant tacticianer that I am, but they're moving Border Patrol from the northern border to the southern border because the southern border, those agents have turned basically into admin people, and they can't process everyone, so they're bringing more agents who have the badge down to the south. And God bless the Border Patrol. My goodness. I couldn't imagine having that job right now, just watching your own government handcuff your own hands. And just the feeling, because you got to start. I mean, I know me personally, if the mission I'm trying to do fails, which it has, I consider myself a failure. But if they're moving guys from the south, what's to stop me from coming to the northern border? And they are there, and I don't want to see it, but we are living in a time, even though we put our heads in the sand and pretend it ain't there, there are still bad people who want to do bad things to all of us. And we have the luxury of living in this country. I mean, you won the lottery just by being born here because of what you can get done, just because of the freedom of the pursuit of happiness. And we have it so easy here. We have what I call first world problems. That's a first world problem. We are worrying about stuff that doesn't even exist, and we're fighting each other over it because someone somewhere that has power just loves to see the fight. As long as they get reelected, they couldn't care less. There's so much bullshitting going on right now, and that it almost seems like they care. They're just they're making up fake problems with real bullshit, and then they're lying to our faces about it. And it's, again, I've been yelled at on Twitter before. They say that I complain about the same things every time, and I don't ever have a solution. I mean, there are solutions. It wouldn't take I'd love to see veterans getting into Congress right now, because hopefully they'll get in the same room and not just do exactly what the leadership says. They were giving the Republicans a bunch of shit because they couldn't decide on the Speaker of the House, yet they had no problem with every single Democrat voting the exact same way every single time. That's not debating. That is following someone who's leading you by your nose. And then that's just the re-election. So making up fake problems with real bullshit, and I hope it doesn't take another attack to make us realize that not just this country, but the majority of us, all of us, the majority of all of us are on the same team, and we are occasionally good people. If you think that social media is being bad too, you just go outside and walk to a store, like a convenience store or a grocery store, give someone a smile and a nod, and, tell them good afternoon, good morning, watch them smile back. Most people are good. Trust me on that one. Just be vigilant, take care of each other, and you're never out of the fight.